Everyone, my name is Kathy Navisi, and I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Waltham. And we are a nonpartisan group that promotes civic engagement. And in Waltham, we've done several projects over the last year. We had candidates nights for last fall's, or not last fall, but 2 years ago, we had candidates nights for city council, mayor, and school committee. And we've worked on a project called Waltham Visions in 2013, which asked people all around Waltham what they liked about Waltham and what they might like to change about Waltham. And tonight we're sponsoring this third candidates forum on how to run for office. And I will let Annette introduce the panelists. Thank you. And if anyone would like to join the League of Women Voters, you can talk to me afterwards.
Thank you, Kathy. We have a wonderful panel for you tonight. I'm actually going to do it in, I was going to say chronological order, but seating order. Sharon Antia on the end is one of our league members. She also ran in a contest for state representative, 5 years ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago?
3 years ago.
3 years ago, okay, whatever. Ted Owens is a member of the League of Women Voters of Needham, and he has run for office, worked as a campaign manager, very active in his local politics. Joe Vizard is our assistant city clerk. I asked Joe particularly, I'm thrilled he's here tonight, because he will tell us about the mechanics of getting ready to run for office, what you have to do administratively to be allowed to run for office. He also was, until very recently, councilor at large here in the city of Waltham, and just recently got appointed to the position of assistant clerk. He's run for office 5 times, did you say?
5 times. I won 3 of them.
So he's ahead there, and I guess he decided to quit while you were ahead. And here, just to my right, is Katie Dowsett. She ran successfully for school committee 4 years ago? 4 years ago. So we timed today's presentation to be at the very end of April because beginning May 1st, you can pull papers to run for office, and we wanted to get you all excited about doing that. So I'm going to give the microphone to Joe. I'm going to ask him to talk about this process of being able to run for public office.
Thank you. Thank you.
The other way.
The other one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, running for office. So, most people think it starts when you pull papers, but for me, it's the first time I ran. And I'm probably going to talk about this more from being a candidate, because I've only been assistant clerk for a couple weeks, but I was a candidate for a long time. So, the first thing you need to do, I mean, you can pull papers first, but it's important to form a committee. So if you go to the Office of Political Campaign and Finance website, OCPF, it's called Form M101. So if you just go Google OCPF Form M101, it'll show up. You create your campaign committee. I had done that when I ran the first time. I did that in January, before the May when I pulled papers, just because you can't set up a bank account, you can't take in money, you can't do any of those things without a campaign committee. You can be the chairman if you want, so you need a chairman and a treasurer. You don't need much more than that. You can be your own chairman, you can't be your own treasurer. So you need a treasurer, and a treasurer that does not work for the government. They can't be a government employee. So then, it comes time, you decide you want to run for office. The plan right now is that you would come to City Hall on Monday this week, May 1st. You could take out papers, you disclose which office that you're running for, and you then need to get 50 signatures to qualify for the ballot. I'd recommend getting 100 signatures or some number significantly over 50, because signatures do get disqualified. The most common reason is that people don't know where they're registered to vote. So when they put the address down, sometimes it's the wrong address. They either moved and didn't change their registration, or they, so you got to get more than the 50 because you don't want to get disqualified. I mean, I've had a lot of mine disqualified before as a candidate, and been shocked at how, so what do you mean? I turned in 100 and I only got 60? Thank God I turned in 100. So you want to make sure that you turn in enough. Now, once those, so those are due in at the end of June. It'll be around July 13th if they come in late, that everything will be certified, and by July 14th we should know whether or not there'll be a preliminary election. So in the wards, so the rules for a preliminary election is it's 1 plus 2 times the number of seats there are. So if it's the ward election where there's 1 seat, if you have more than 2 candidates, so once you go to 3 candidates, you're going to have a preliminary election. It's a preliminary election, not a primary, because elections in Waltham are nonpartisan. So, there's not a Democratic and Republican primary. There's a preliminary election to get us down to the point where you have that. So in the councilor at large race, if there are 13 candidates, that would force a citywide preliminary. In the school committee, if there were 7 candidates, where there's 3 seats that are contested right now, there would be a preliminary election. That would be in September 19th is the date I have. So that would mean that there would be a September election. If we don't hit that threshold, there would only be a November election, which would be November 7th. So those are sort of the dates, and those are sort of the mechanics of getting yourself on the ballot and what to expect when you get there.
Talk to me about financing. What are some constraints about money?
Constraints about money. Well, the biggest constraint I always had was I was a public employee. So I worked for the state and I was a candidate. That meant that I could not personally fundraise, that a committee had to fundraise on my behalf. That's usually a big hang-up that people can have if they're a government employee, but otherwise, there's limits, which I think were recently raised. So it used to be $500. I think it's $1,000 now. I've never taken in that much money, so I've never had to tell someone like you've hit your max. I always had smaller donations from a wider group of people. So that's within a calendar year. You have to file reports. So they're due usually, I think it's 30 days before each election. So if there's a preliminary election and you're in it, you'd have to file a report before that. And if you have to file a report before the general election, and then you'll file a year-end report. So in a year like this, you end up filing 3 reports. But the big thing is you got to have a committee, so you have to have somewhere for it to go. So if you haven't organized a committee yet and you're thinking about running for office, you should really think about organizing a committee somehow. Because you can't have a committee, if you don't have a committee, you can't have a bank account, you can't take in the money. So, and these elections cost a lot of money.
Can you give us some idea of what an average spend would be for a city councilor?
So if it's in the city council, in the at-large race, it can be as high as 15 or 16 or 18,000, and it can be 10,000, and it can be as low as 5. People tend to spend what they can raise. So in the last election, I think I spent about 10. I know another candidate in the at-large race spent about 18, and I know a couple others spent 10. I'm talking thousands, 10,000. So it can be an expensive proposition for people.
How well correlated are the results to the spending?
They're pretty close. But spending, you spend what you can raise, and what you can raise is also sort of a sign of your popularity with the voters. So there is that part of it too. But it's all about, from the candidate side, it's about introducing yourself to people. And if you have more money, you can do that better with postcards and mailings and other things. Where and that's what the money's spent on, mail. That's what it's spent on. But if you pull campaign finance reports, you'll see that it's mail is what they're paying for.
Okay, Sharon.
Can I ask first, do we know what seats are going to be up for grabs?
So all the city council seats.
All of them, okay.
So all 9 wards, all 6 at-large seats, and then 3 school committee seats.
Sharon, I have a question for you. If you could kindly give her the microphone. I'm going to ask Katie the same question.
Okay.
Why did you decide to run for office, and how was your experience doing so?
I decided to run. It was a split decision. I was working on somebody else's campaign, and I was driving home from the Western Mass after having delivered some materials for him, and I thought, he used to have the seat that Stanley has in Lincoln, because I live in Lincoln, and our state rep, we just got Stanley 5 or 6 years ago in a redistricting, and I missed the guy that we had, and I was really sad that he was running for treasurer, but I was working for him anyway, and so I was driving home from doing some work for him, and I thought, I could run against Stanley. What the hell? So it wasn't very well thought out. So I went to Boston the next day and pulled papers. I didn't do anything Joe said about getting ahead of the game in terms of forming a committee, which I think is really sound advice. But in terms of am I glad I did it, I think everybody should run for office. It was one of the best things I ever did. I got slammed in Waltham, but I spent all my time campaigning in Waltham because I live in Lincoln. And it forced me to get outside of myself in ways that I never would have done before. It forced me to go. I knocked on so many doors, and people were fabulous. Whether they, you oftentimes know if they're going to support you or not. Didn't matter. They were just so grateful that I was out there knocking on doors and doing this work. I can't say enough good things. I already liked Waltham, but I love Waltham now because I just felt such a warm embrace. So I would highly recommend it, but I would recommend that you form a committee and particularly have a fundraiser and a manager that has a clue, which I didn't have either of those things.
Okay. Katie, same question for you.
So I ran for school committee, and it was more of sort of a natural evolution of things for me. So I had spent my entire career in sort of education and youth development, running after school programs and then teaching. And I was teaching in Waltham, had been teaching for 5 years. And both in terms of sort of my long-term career trajectory, I was thinking about, I love teaching, I love education, really passionate about it, really feel sort of that it's in my blood, but had been thinking about sort of leaving direct service to think more about big picture, think about systems change, think about policy, and to kind of get involved in that arena. And then specifically, and I say this as somebody who loves Waltham Public Schools. I think we're doing a lot of amazing things. But as a teacher here, there were things that I was enormously frustrated with. And I had the sense that there were policies, both at the local level, certainly at the state level, and certainly at the federal level, especially under No Child Left Behind, that there were policies in place that were not only sort of counterproductive and counterintuitive, but actually harmful to children. And in particular, my experience in Waltham, my biggest frustrations were around the systems that we had in place for educating our English learners. I won't go into all the details, though I'm happy to answer questions about that at any time. But basically, I would say that we had a system in place that was just setting kids up for failure, setting kids up for stigma, setting kids up to for failure, to feel that they themselves were the problem rather than recognizing that we have a system that isn't educating them appropriately. So I was really, really frustrated with that, and there are people out there who are amazing and have the capacity to stay as a classroom teacher while also starting to sort of chip away at some of the bigger policy issues. I didn't have that capacity, and teaching took everything out of me, and so for me, in order to start to think about that bigger picture, I had to step away from the classroom. So I stepped away, I enrolled in a public policy program, and I ran for office that same year. And the experience of running. So I echo Sharon's sentiments. It was fabulous, exhausting, again, huge learning curve. I was told over and over again that you need to get out there and knock on doors, and I did a little of that. I didn't do as much as maybe I was counseled to do, but it just made me nervous and anxious, but I found something that worked for me, which was also a way to still get to meet lots of new people, which was house parties. So I had friends that offered to just have me over. They would flyer their neighborhood. Sometimes it would be me and one person, literally, and sometimes it'd be 10 or 15. But what was really great about that, well, there were several things that were great about that. One, I was just getting to meet new people. Two, the people that were coming out were, people that were actively wanting to, talk to me and share their ideas with me and ask me about my opinions. And so for me, I can be a fairly anxious person, and so the idea of knocking on the door and not knowing if that person wants to see me or not just was difficult. And so having house parties, I felt like, okay, people are here because they want to be. And it was a nice, intimate space to have some really substantive conversations. And then what ended up happening is that I would maybe meet somebody at a house party, and then they would offer to have a house party. And I don't want to overstate it. It's not like, hundreds of people were knocking on my door offering to have house parties, but I did do, maybe a dozen or 15 of them over the course of the campaign, and that was just something that worked for me. I do think that, were I to run again, I would push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit and maybe do a little more door knocking now. And I think I've been able to have a shift in framing what a campaign is about that would help me do that, which is, I was really nervous about the idea of just being on the spotlight and answering questions, but the shift in my thinking now is, well, you're campaigning as much to just ask questions and learn from people as you are about, sort of selling yourself. And so having that in mind, I think, would make it easier for me to knock on someone's door.
How many people were in that race? I forgot.
We did have a preliminary election, so there were at least 7. I honestly don't remember, 7 or 8. So we had a preliminary election.
And why were you elected? What did you bring that the others didn't?
Well, I'll say something, which is that no incumbents were elected that year. There was a lot of frustration, particularly on the part of educators, and with the status quo. And the teachers union got involved in more than they usually do, in more visible ways than they usually do. And there were actually 3 of us who were endorsed by the local union, and the 3 of us got elected. So that certainly was part of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. Ted, would you just give us an overview of your political career? And then I've got some more questions for you.
Certainly. I'm probably twice as old as the other people here on the panel. And I have been involved in campaigns for about 50 years. I started when I was in high school, and I have been very actively involved I started in a selectman's race in the town I grew up in, working in that campaign. I went away to Georgetown and I majored in government. I actually worked in the State House for a while when I graduated, then went to business school and went off, but kept politics as a avocation and a hobby my entire life. And I have been a candidate for local office. I've served on Needham's Board of Selectmen. I've served on Needham's Board of Assessors. I've served on Needham's Planning Board, and I've been a town meeting member. I was first elected to town meeting in 1988. And if you've ever sat through one of these, it's very different from city council, but you really have to be devoted to the process to sit through one of these town meetings for 6 or 7 nights. Town meeting and politics in general will teach you that it doesn't take all kinds, there just are all kinds. And that politics is a volunteer effort. So not only are there all kinds of interesting people, but you don't want to turn anybody away. You want everybody to be involved. I've managed campaigns for state senator. I've managed campaigns for state representative. I've been involved in statewide campaigns. I was a manager of a congressional campaign. So I've done this in a lot of different ways. It is I think, the most social activity possible. So if you enjoy people, and if you enjoy talking to people, and if you enjoy discussing public issues and current events, this is a good way for you to spend your time, because it's a lot of fun, and particularly on the local level, you really and truly do make a difference. It is amazing in a city or town environment how easy it is to make an impact, and to be able to look at something and say, gee, I was part of that. Whether it's building a new school, or whether it's, a new neighborhood, or whether it's housing, whatever it is, there's nothing more wonderful than the feeling that you have contributed to the Commonwealth.
Talk to me about what a campaign manager does, please.
Okay. The first thing I want to say about being a campaign manager is that you cannot be both the candidate and the campaign manager. So if you want to be the candidate, one of the very first things you need to do is find the campaign manager. Because the candidate doesn't really have to know how to run a campaign, not the first time. You'll learn it, but you don't have to know how to do it. The candidate's really a resource. So it's the job of the campaign manager to use that resource wisely. A couple of people have talked about knocking on doors, and I will tell you that there is nothing at a local level that beats knocking on doors. There's really nothing. Now, it is a terrifying experience. In fact, I found running for office, when you first run for office, it's very terrifying, because you're expected to do all of these things that for most of us don't come naturally. How do I walk up to a stranger, introduce myself, explain what I'm doing, and ask them to support me and ask them to vote for me? That, you say, oh my God, what an arrogant thing to do. And it's a very, very hard thing to do. And you have to sort of force yourself to do that, because the person on the other side is looking at presidential candidates on television, and they expect you to be like that. And at the local level, we're not like that. The campaign manager is the bad cop. There's a good cop and there's a bad cop. The campaign manager's job is not to make friends. The campaign manager's job is to make sure stuff gets done. And that's a big challenge. One of the jobs of the campaign manager is to make sure that you are out knocking on doors. That the campaign manager comes to your house on Saturday morning and chases you out of bed and says, I'm sorry, you chose to do this. This is what you have to do if you want to be successful. House parties is a great alternative too. And one of the things I like about house parties is you get a double benefit, right? Don't be afraid if you invite 100 people and 5 show up, because that's pretty typical. You'll get 5%. But 100 people got an invitation from one of your neighbors, and that invitation alone says, I'm supporting Sharon. Come to my house and meet her. And it's that kind of retail level politics that is what it's all about. We were talking before the meeting, where Joe said, how do you meet 5,000 people if that's what you need, okay, to get elected? Well, you can't possibly meet 5,000 people. But if you meet 1,000 and they have sent out dear friend cards, or they have sent out invitations to events, then you've extended that network, and that's how you reach the 5,000 people on a local level. The campaign manager also, there are a couple of other people that the campaign manager needs to make sure they're doing their jobs, right? You need somebody who is watching the rules. the stuff that Joe talked about, most of that stuff, how many votes, how many signatures you need, how many, what the deadlines are, when you have to submit those signatures to the town clerk, and when you have to take them to the next step, and when you have to take them to the next step. Most of that's pretty much inside baseball. What do I mean by that? Well, here in Massachusetts, all the political rules are written by the Democratic Party. And that's not intended as a criticism, that's just a statement of fact. The Democrats control the legislature writes the rules. So all these rules are written by the Democratic Party. And they are intended, first and foremost, to protect incumbents. So that there are all these little tiny rules and, sneaky things. This is a true story. I actually know someone who was running for state representative. And state representative, I think, is 300 signatures in your entire district. And he had gathered 600 signatures and had brought them to City Hall, and they'd all been certified. But then the candidate has to go down to City Hall, pick them up, bring them down to Boston, and file them with the Secretary of State. He missed that deadline. He was not on the ballot. So you need to have somebody like Joe who knows the rules, who can tell you what the rules are, and make sure that you're following the rules, and gives you that follow-up every day. And the other thing he talked about is money. And money is important. Dollars are not as important as voters. So if you're the candidate and you're going door to door, that's a more important way for you to spend your time. But somebody's got to worry about the money, and the thing you need to worry about with the money is you need to raise it, you need to spend it, and you need to report it. And the most important of those is reporting. You can run a campaign without money, but if you don't fill out the forms and do all of that good stuff, you're in trouble. So that's one of the other things that your campaign manager does. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to the rest of the panel, the campaign manager has to manage your volunteers, right? Every volunteer that raises their hand and says, I support you, how can I help you? You need to find a way to drag them into the campaign. Someone needs to keep track of that. Somebody needs to give everybody assignments. Somebody needs to follow up with those people. You want to give everybody a title. You want precinct captains, you want block captains, you want everything you can get, because when it comes time for a big sign holding, you want to be able to call those people and have them come out and hold them signs. So I'm going to pause there, but as you know, as a politician, I could talk all night.
I had a question just ran out of my head. It seems to me that particularly in local elections, familiarity with the name sometimes seems the most important factor in getting elected. How important are actual issues on a local level? Anybody?
I don't think they're as important as familiarity with the name. But it depends on the election. If there's a reason why voters are upset about something, that can change that. But I mean, I think I ran once and lost. I ran another time and lost. And when I ran the third time, there was more familiarity with my name, and I think that's part of it. So, but people want to hear what you have to say, but people aren't as checked into to what local government's doing as they probably should be. So the familiarity thing becomes a bigger part of it, I think, which is which is why what you heard about house parties and knocking on doors and doing all that stuff to put your name and yourself in front of people is so important.
Can I add to it? I think, like Ted mentioned, the incumbent. I think it was Ted. Somebody mentioned the incumbent, and I think that is really the key. The incumbent has all the advantages, and even to the extent of when you're running against, or in my experience, I will say, running against a seated Democrat. I was an independent, so I didn't have the Republican or the Democratic Party support. But in addition, I wanted to interview people that were in this role as state reps throughout the state, and they would not speak to me because I was running against a seated Democrat, and how dare I run against a seated Democrat. I did end up getting one state rep to speak to me on the condition that it be anonymous, and I couldn't let anybody know that I spoke to her. So I think that's a big part of it, being the person that already has the seat. Unless you're really screwed up bad, I think you probably have a better chance to stay there. So I think if I had run again a second time and then maybe a third time, like Joe did, I think I would have had a solid shot at winning the seat, because I think it's familiarity. I agree.
I don't have an incredibly well-formed thought, but something that I want to just, offer into the conversation. We were talking about this before we started as well, which is that sort of what Joe was saying about not that many people really being checked in. I really did find, and this is going to sound cynical or something, but I really have found that an incredibly, incredibly small percentage of people are paying attention at all to local politics, to local government. And that does not mean that those are people that don't connect to issues, that don't have priorities, that don't have concerns. And I'm thinking through right now that there's maybe something to be learned about the recent national election, federal election, where certainly there was familiarity, with the Trump name and with, say, Bernie Sanders' name, but in both cases, on both ends of the spectrum, voters came out that hadn't come out before. And there was a reason for that that was beyond familiarity, because there was familiarity with many other candidates in many other times. But there was something about their message or something, issue that they brought up that hadn't been taken seriously before or given enough energy before that brought those people out. So I am just always thinking about what those opportunities are here at the local level. Who's not coming out and why, and what is it that we're not recognizing that's an issue?
Okay.
One thing I'd also say though that it's it's not impossible to beat incumbents because I beat someone that was an incumbent and I ended up getting onto the city council. Katie defeated incumbents when she went on to the school committee, and as an incumbent, Carlos, who's sitting at the back of the room, he beat me. He got more votes than me in the last election. So, I still got to be on the council. But so, my take on was I only had to come in sixth. I never had to come in first. But, so it is possible, but it's a lot of work.
Okay.
Can I just,
Go ahead, Ted. Sure.
I just want to address your question about what's more important to the issue or the person. And I think, as others have said, in rare circumstances, there is an issue that brings people out. But that is not as common as people coming out for you. And in fact, what you often see is that the people who are active in one campaign, one election cycle, won't be active in the next because their friend isn't a candidate. It's a very, very personal process. You asked me about, the campaign manager, but I would tell you that the very first thing that you should do if you want to run for office is make a list of your 100 closest friends. Now you say, but I don't know 100 people. In which case, you need to work first in somebody else's campaign as a volunteer coordinator and get to know 100 people, because it's all about that personal outreach. It's very much retail, person to person. So that's why I think the person, most of the time, rarely there's an issue, but most of the time, it's the person.
Okay. Are you willing to take questions from the audience? Questions from the audience? Anybody have any?
I have a question about fundraising and the reporting requirements. I don't know if this panel can address it, but if you want to collect donations online, if you can speak to what the legal requirements are and what information we need to be capturing to file the appropriate reports. That might be a question to like call the OCPF with.
I mean, OCPF does have specific guidance on it.
It's not very thorough for credit card online donations, though. It's more about checks and cash, which is why I was asking. I know they have a form next week, but
The other thing I'll say there, I don't have the answer to your question, but I just found that I could pick up the phone fairly regularly and call their office, call the State Ethics Board, and call the City Clerk's office, and found people incredibly responsive and helpful. Yeah.
There is a way to do it, because I know I did it. So,
yeah, I
but
mean, like Carlos, who I know is in the room, collects them through online platforms, so I know it can be done.
Yeah, when I ran, I collected them online. There's a site, I don't know if they're still operating because they've gone down for a while, but democracy.com that lets you have a free website, and they have a facility to help you collect money. And it was really treated no different than a check. There was nothing significantly different from that. So I used online donations almost exclusively.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But the one thing I will say about filing, I have paid a lot of fines to the state of Massachusetts for not filing on time. It comes to $25 a day out of your own pocket if you don't file on time, so make sure you do that.
You each talked about campaigns being expensive and the amounts of money that you can spend or not spend, as the case may be. So with limited funds, where do you invest? Where is it best used? Is it lawn signs? Is it flyers? Is it tackling issues? Is it, where do you spend your money?
the most important part of the most important thing I did in almost all my campaigns was free. So, you know, it was the list of good voters and some flyers. There's some expense in that, and a clipboard, and knocking on the door and giving them a flyer. You know, the mail's nice to have, but it is more about meeting voters than spending money. So you can run a very good campaign with very little money if you have the time and the energy and the ability to, you know, knock on people's doors when half of them might not want to see you. So, I mean.
So when you have the money, where do you put it? Where do you put it first? What do you spend it on? What's most valuable to you?
I mean, I spent most of my money on mail and then some on signs, and there wasn't much more. And I know that there are more sophisticated things that people do. I never did any of them. I figured the main thing that I needed to know was who voted in the last municipal election, because they're the most likely people to vote again. And
So you're mailing, it's targeted mailing.
it's targeted mailing. It's not the whole. Yeah, and that's the mailing list. That's the door knocking list. That's the list.
And everyone can get access to that list through his office, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and have the map of Waltham. I'm assuming you're running
Yeah.
Mount Waltham,
Yes.
the map of Waltham on a wall somewhere, so you can mark out where you've been targeting, so then you know which neighborhoods you still need to reach.
So I spent $5,000 in my campaign. Just the slightly reverse of Joe. I spent most of it on signs and some of it on mailing, and I only did a mailer to educators in the city because that was my sort of connection.
Yes.
You talked about, and thank you for doing that, you talked about mainly a single candidate running against another candidate. Do you have an idea if a slate would work and how it would work? Is that something interesting to think about?
So I'll just say, thank you. I ended up, and I, 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 feel fairly confident that he'd be okay with me saying this. I ended up befriending another candidate on the trail. So John Frasca, he's a current school committee member, and we just were campaigning together, and we found ourselves being at events together and chatting and just getting to know each other through the campaign. And then we ended up going to house parties together, hosting house parties together. We weren't a formal slate. No one was running us as a slate. We weren't doing that together necessarily in any formal way. But I do think that some began to associate us with each other. And then connected to that, again, we had the teachers union endorsed 3 candidates. And there were more than 3 challengers, but the 3 challengers that were endorsed were the ones that got elected.
Yes.
You talked about being endorsed by the union. What relative value is gathering endorsements from either unions or organizations or whatever in the election process?
For me, it wasn't all that important. I mean, it was nice, it was helpful, because you get bodies, and sometimes you get money. But I think there are different types of endorsements, right? So there's the endorsement of a group, which is nice to have, but the better endorsement is, the guy that takes your lawn sign in a neighborhood, and then his neighbors come by and ask him, "Oh, I see you have Joe Hazard's sign. Why are you voting for him?" And that was sort of what Katie was talking about with the house parties. That's really the endorsement that you want. You want, when your name comes up, people to have something positive to say about you. So, I guess that's the most important endorsement.
Another thing I found really helpful for me, not being from Waltham, is I went to all the concerts on the Common and passed out flyers there and talked to people there almost every single week. And people knew me because I was there week after week, and they'd say, "Oh, you already gave me your flyer," and I'd say, "Well, this is a new one," because I would tweak them every week, so I made them all myself. So I thought that was a really good way to get to know, because then when I would knock on people's doors, they'd say, "Oh, I normally don't open it for strangers, but I've seen you before at the Common, so I opened it for you." And another place is going to the senior centers. I had such great times at the senior centers. And one place said to me, I came back a second time, and the director said, "Sharon, the people here love you because you sit down and you listen to them, and you talk to them." They said, usually candidates come in, say their spiel for 15 minutes or whatever, and then they're out the door. But you just sit there and just have a conversation. So I'd recommend just, being one with whoever you're with. I think people really resonate with that.
Any other questions? Yes.
So you guys have spoken a little bit about, getting to know who you know and whatnot. As the local environment changes due to housing constraints, where communities are often broken up, friend groups are broken up, so it's not as, everyone in this neighborhood knows everyone and that's all of their friend groups. How is that changing the local election scene as far as, if your best friend lives in Medford and you live in Waltham, it's sort of, as groups are less centric, how is that changing local elections?
It changes it in some ways, but it doesn't change it that much. My experience is it doesn't. Most people my age don't vote in local elections, so they're here and they don't vote, and they moved out of town and they don't vote. It's been my experience. The saddest thing you can do is, look at that voter list and realize how many of your friends didn't even show up. I stopped looking for their names at one point because, and it comes back to that good voters list. The people that voted in the last municipal election are going to vote in this one. There were ways to get them to vote, but the biggest predictor of whether or not they're going to vote this year is did they vote 2 years ago in the last election.
Yes. When we pull the papers, is the voter list included, or do we need to ask specifically for it?
You need to ask for it.
Okay. Do we need to call ahead?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have copies ready.
And you want to get it in both the hard copy and the digital copy.
Okay. Thank you.
And how long is that window open to pull papers? Starts May 1, goes till...
In theory, you could take them out June 30th and try to get your 50 signatures in by 5 o'clock when we close.
Okay, so we can pull a paper up till the close.
Yeah, but you got to get those 50
Yeah.
signatures in one day in that case.
2 months. You have a question?
So if you have the voter list, there is a way to cross-reference when you get signatures, whether they're active registered voters.
Yeah.
So you could do that during the process.
You could do that. As long as they didn't change in the last 2 years. Because the voter list is a static, that's a snapshot in time. That's where they were registered 2 years ago in November. It doesn't update itself for any changes.
I know that in one of the past forums, one of the ideas someone had mentioned, I think, with the signatures was just having them do their name and then going to the voters list to check where they're actually registered. Did any of you have experience trying that, or whether that was a legitimate tactic? Or?
Yeah, sometimes people don't know that.
You know, another thing, I never did that, what you suggested, but you have to make sure the signature is legible. I lost a lot because they weren't legible, so, you know, so then I learned to just write their name in next to it in my own handwriting, if I needed to.
Karen, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, just sort of two, but let me start with one. As candidates, do you have anything to tell in giving good information about what to do? I'm wondering if there's anything in your experiences that tell you that there are certain caveats or things that might happen that aren't so great as a candidate that that you have to be kind of thick-skinned about, or to just be kind of prepared for, that maybe you wouldn't be quite like blindsided by some of the pitfalls of being a candidate.
I mean, just that, yeah, I think you do have to have thick skin in general, because you're just, whether it's issues that you disagree on, or the one that's coming to mind right now. So I was at one of these house parties and really started to get my groove and feel confident, and I'm just babbling on and on. And afterwards, the gentleman comes up and introduces himself to me as someone who had previously been a school business manager. And he was very friendly, but he said, so, you know, I used to be a school business manager. Here's my card so that the next time you do one of these, you can know what you're talking about when you talk about the budget. So that hurt. But I took it as like, yeah, I really need to have a better handle on this before I go talk about it again, you know. So it's good feedback, but it's not always kind feedback.
Still painful.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not always kind feedback. So you said you have to have a thick skin. It's kind of an interesting balance, right? Because you're putting yourself out there, and you want people to like you, and you want people to vote for you, and yet you're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of people who say, nah, I don't like you. Yeah, I don't like what you stand for. Yeah, I don't like your brother. You know, I don't like something that happened 10 years ago in junior high school. You are going to have to be prepared for that. And, you know, you just sort of say, okay, thank you very much. And you keep your cool and you walk away.
Can I say one more thing on that, actually? You know, Joe said earlier, I think before we got started, that, you know, being a candidate and being an elected official are two very different things. But to what Ted was just saying, you know, also being really thoughtful about what you're trying to get yourself into. Because while I did find I had to have a little bit of a thick skin on the campaign trail, I really had to have a thick skin as a school committee member. And I can tell you, I grew up in Waltham, and I have lost friends because of my role on the school committee and decisions that I had to make. So that's, you know, that's a real consideration.
My second question is, if you have, well, you know, in the League of Women Voters, one of our primary missions is to get people to vote. And you're talking about, of course, as candidates, you're going for targeted voters for good reason, targeted, more predictable voters. But do you have any insight, and maybe through your candidacies, any insight as to what you think it would, some of the things it would take to get people who hadn't been regular voters or had voted before to vote. I mean, I know you don't want to, as a candidate, spend a lot of time on somebody who you think isn't going to do it, but do you have any insight at all about the spotty or the non-voters in terms of outreach or how to get through to them to convince them it's a good thing to vote?
Well, from the campaign's perspective, you really do not have the time to do that. That's why candidates love the League of Women Voters. Because the League of Women Voters is out there encouraging people to vote. The only thing that will bring out an unusual number of new voters is a really hot issue that they feel touched by. One of the things we were also talking about before the forum started is that there's been a lot of energy since the election in November that didn't exist before. And there are a lot of people getting involved who weren't involved before. And they feel a motivation to do that. But other than that, campaign is really focused on who is most likely to vote. And the person who is most likely to vote is the person who voted the last time. And if it's somebody who's voted 6 or 8 times over a decade in the city election, you can pretty much be sure they're going to vote in this election. So you want to meet them, find out if they're for you, and then make sure they vote. But it really is for other organizations really to drum up support from people who are non-voters.
Carlos, you had a question?
Yeah, the question for the assistant city clerk.
The signatures, the signatures that you need to bring usually is over 50. You don't want to just tie it up to 50 because you never know. Do you actually? There's a question I always had. Is it supposed to be a signature, or can they print their name? Because I have a feeling that if you sign, you might never know exactly who it is. Is it more about printing the name rather than signatures?
It says sign, so it should be signed, but it's important the person can tell who it is in the house, so that there has to be some indication of what the name is in that signature.
If it's mine, you'll never know that's me. So that's why I think it's.
But you can sign it and then print it above it.
Okay, well that's something.
There could be some way to.
Okay.
In Lincoln, they encourage you to have people print their names. So I think it's open to interpretation by the clerk's office.
If you're a first-time candidate, what is the best information that you can get from City Hall or from the clerk's office for your campaign?
I mean, so when you take out your papers, you will get a folder full of information. There'll be a map. There'll be probably I think the campaign finance reports that you need to file. I don't know if the organizing form's in there. It probably is. There'll be the calendar with all the information, and then other than that, getting an order list is important.
What about the budget or information on counselors?
Yeah. So let me just say, being a city councilor and running for office are in a lot of ways 2 separate things. But it's great to be up on the issues, and you should be able to talk about them. And the budget's online, all that information's online, but
it's a popularity.
But it's not. But meeting voters and people. I think people care more about you as a person than your ideas a lot of times. So is this a good person that I have faith in leading my community? I think resonates more with, are they a Democrat or a Republican? Are they a fiscal conservative, or do they want to spend more? Because people know so little about the minutia of city government, other than they want the pothole fixed in front of their house. Badly. And that, you can spend a lot of time learning about that, but one of the most important things, when you go to someone, most people will tell you right away what they're concerned about, whether it's the tax rate or some neighborhood issue or a dog off a leash, and that is going to be the most important issue to that person.
I will say, I definitely agree with Joe. I don't know if anyone out here is considering a run for school committee. I think it's maybe a little bit different with a school committee run because your main voters are parents with kids in the school. So a lot of them are paying attention. And a lot of them do know the minutia, and that's where I got, pushed off my game, and I didn't know enough about the budget. And so I do think that the school committee run is a little bit different than a city council run in that regard.
How much do school committee and regular city council overlap? Like if somebody's not at all? So if I'm running for city council, I should just keep my mouth shut about the schools?
It's your best bet. Yeah, I mean, so the city council approves the school budget,
Okay.
but and we can, for the most part, the city council can only cut budgets. So the city council can never add money, except in one instance, which is the instance in which the school committee voted out a higher number than the mayor put forward, and then the school committee requested that the city council restore the funds. It's the only time the city council can add money to the budget. So all the city council can do is cut, and for the most part, the only thing you can do with the school budget is cut it. So unless you have some great cuts to education, there's not much you can talk about.
Marcia, you have a question.
Thank you. More or less, you said that issues, and these days, it changed completely. The local Waltham. Waltham probably is not what it was when you ran for office the first time. And the main issue that we are facing now, number 45, has brought a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats and independents, out. Now, for someone who is going to run for the first time and is a breezer, was not born or grew up in Waltham, what would be your advice to start? How to understand Waltham that has the biggest Ugandan community, that has South Indians, that has Chinese, Brazilians, and Latinos?
So I just go back to the biggest predictor of who's going to vote in the election in November is who voted in the election 2 years ago in November. So whoever those people are, meet them, because they're going to be the ones probably deciding the election.
I also want to say, in addition to going to senior centers or to senior living homes, go to PTO meetings. I know I got some votes from PTO meetings. People said to me when I knocked on the door later, she said, "Oh yeah, you came to our PTO meeting, I'm voting for you." So it's not as targeted, like Joe keeps saying, but I think people that are on the PTO are probably involved people anyway. And it's a good way to get to know the community if you're newer to the community, if you talk to the PTOs and you find out what their concerns are. Also, I found going to the churches, and I found the churches to be very receptive. I'm a Catholic, and Catholic churches, I hate to say it's a little more difficult to get people to talk to you, but some of the other ones, go to the mosque. There's a mosque tour this Sunday, go to that. You'll get to meet a lot of Muslims, and the synagogue is very open to people talking with them, so just find ways to meet people in every Wednesday at 2 o'clock there's Carlos, help me out,
Two priests and a rabbi.
Two priests and a rabbi, thank you, at the Cafe on the Common, and you get to meet a wide variety of people there, and they're all very involved in Waltham.
Marcia, with your question and, what we said before, what Ted was saying about sort of the role of a candidate and a campaign manager versus the role of, say, something like the League of Women Voters. I think hearing Ted say it that way was helpful for me because it's been something that I've struggled with. If you decide to run for office, then you're deciding to try to win. And if you're going to try to win, you're going to try to win by reaching out to the people that are already engaged, already have access, already have power, already have voice. And maybe you're doing that to get in so that you're then able to represent or make change or whatever, but it's a different commitment than the commitment to do community engagement in a different way. And I think it's taken me even until this conversation to really kind of understand those as two different things.
Any last comments from the panel?
Yeah, if you're thinking of running, do it.
I loved, I loved running for office. It's something you don't do if you don't love it, because it is a lot of work, and I love being a city councilor, and it was hard to walk away from it when I had to make that decision, because you do really get a chance to help people. And I know they may sound like trivial things, the snowplow didn't show up on time, the pothole needs to get fixed. But even something like before I got on, we had a health department, and it was still a focus of that health department to the only focus was really doing the sanitation inspections and the food, inspecting restaurants, and we had an opiate crisis going on in the city. And for 2 years, I tried to get a social worker into the health department to help people with that. And after 2 years of chipping away with it, today there's a social worker that's trying to bring people together and trying to save lives. And so, the thing about local government is you can make a real impact. Think about the things local government does for you. They pick up your trash. You send your kids to them during the day, and they take care of your kids. The water that comes out of your faucet, it comes from the local government. Almost all of the things you need daily are coming from your local government, and it's an important office. You need good people serving in it. I enjoyed it. You do have to have a thick skin. Your motives are always going to be questioned. They're all from the day you become a candidate, your motives are questioned. Why you're doing something is questioned. It's because he likes this one, it's because he likes that one, it's because he wants this, it's because he wants that. You gotta, you take that in and you soldier on and you do the best job you can. But, I loved being a city councilor, and I loved being a candidate. So I probably will not do it for a long, long time, or I may never do it again, but I enjoyed it.
Well, I want to thank all of you. This has been wonderful this evening.